change in favor of some modern trends whereby we introduce some consequence, because you're creating socio-cultural problems where people take assets, first sons take assets without responsibility. If you cannot adopt the responsibility, then let your younger ones assume that position. Shouldn't the custom be interrogated? And I say this because the custom cannot be sacrosanct. The custom in Cross River was such that you kill twins in the past. That custom had to change because it was repugnant to natural justice. Are we not at the stage now where, yes, promogeniture will support it, but if the first son exhibits those traits where he refuses to permit his younger ones to live in the house, where they're at an age where they cannot fend for themselves, or refuses to take care of his mother, shouldn't we introduce some sort of instruments to reverse that gift? And that will be a deterrent for those who simply are lazy and just waiting to inherit property.
What we have found with time is that because many first sons inside them look forward to when their father will give way and they take over property, they are really not strong financially nor mentally sufficiently developed. They are not ashamed of the kind of things you have observed. It doesn't hurt them as long as it is giving them any form of advantage. Put differently, in the circumstances that they have found themselves, because they have been lazy, they can hardly help themselves very well, not to talk of helping others. So that problem is there. By radio, I haven't listened to chiefs and allowing person to choose any of the houses of the deceased father rather than pinning down to be the first house the father ever built. I believe that that is an opening that as we begin to whisper to chiefs, some of your observations may come up for discussion with the Oba, and there can be times that the palace and the chiefs can find a way to straighten some of these misbehaviors. But for now, the tradition is that he inherits.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes.
I want to go to another question which is extremely topical and quite prevalent. A first son, by conviction, refuses to partake in the burial rites of his father. Yes. The position is that you must you must partake in the funeral rites of your father before you can inherit. Yes. Otherwise, you hold the property on trust. Yes. It's not your property. Yes. So where a first son decides not to, by conviction, either because he says he's a Christian. Now, it's very interesting, perceptions. I take it as a social right. Some say it's a shrine. You must, respect the shrine. But by the way I was brought up, procedure we follow. So it's neither here nor there. But there are some children who will deliberately refuse, but nonetheless, they would want to acquire the property. I have my strong views about that, but I'd like to hear you, sir. What's your view about that situation?
Well, it's not a new situation at all. We see this all the time. If a person is refusing to come forward for the second burial mainly because the father would have been interred a long time ago, the family will meet and put a committee to put the house on rent. And they will appoint a treasurer who will be collecting the money. If the family finds that the first son is shying away from participating in the second burial because he has no money, then the family will take the money from the rent and ask the others to support, the burial will be done.
Will he be entitled to inherit the property?
Nobody can take the Igiobe from the first son. Even if he's a cripple, he will take that house.
So if he doesn't perform the burial and he doesn't...
No, he has performed because they collected rent. Oh. And because that house is going to dissolve him. He has been denied the money because he didn't perform the burial. So money has been collected from what he would have inherited. The burial has been done. They give him the house.
So whereby conviction, he simply refuses, declines, rather than being incapable.
The brothers and sisters will cry out, the family will meet and invite him. If his recalcitrant is not ready to do the burial, the matter comes before the Oba. And the Oba will ask him to go and do the burial.
And what if he refuses?
No, I don't know of a single case.
Well,
I don't know of a single case. He will do the burial. At that time, he will know that he's on his own, on a dangerous track.
Well, I think I suspect what the answer might just be. Because what you said, sir, is simply that you will do everything to ensure that the burial is performed.
Absolutely.
So where it is not performed, because in principle, the first son says, I'm not going to do any of this.
No, from what I know so far, that will be presumptuous, because often, after the Oba's intervention, they go back and manage the situation out. It's not crazy.
I will leave the question, because I've had colleagues and friends and family members who will not even come to Benin because they have their view about it, let alone attend the Oba's invitation. But I will leave that question. I'd like to slightly progress on this issue, whether we can circumvent some of these challenges. And Sean, I hope you're hearing me, because I'm going to be calling you next. The view that we take in our law firm is that where you give out your property during your lifetime, because these are testamentary gifts and these are testamentary issues. One where you don't have property during your lifetime, then there is no property which will be the subject of disputes.
Yes.
So if you took a loan, just as well the bank will recoup its debt before the issue of testamentary question comes in. Similarly, we take the view that if you create a trust, and what's a trust? It's simply removing the property from you in a transparent way and putting it in the hands of a third party, and that third party holds it in accordance with your wishes in your lifetime. It's not a testamentary gift. What normally happens in some cases is that even the deceased father becomes a tenant in his own property. As I said earlier on, you pauperize the deceased person such that he has nothing. How has the palace dealt with this in terms of a deceased father who creates a trust, an instrument of trust which could be registrable, moving away his properties in Yogbe to a third party and dictating in that instrument as to how the property will be distributed? Have you had situations of that nature, sir?
From native Benin people, this will be alien and really haven't seen, but I am aware that some educated Benin elite have their property pooled, and every year children come together and share rents coming from that kind of arrangement. It doesn't hurt anybody, because they have all agreed they are enjoying the benefit from such arrangement. So that's all we know.
So the position in the palace is that these are new instruments, and therefore you may not have been confronted with such.
No, because the ones we know, they pool their property together. Every year, the rent from everything, they come together, they share. And they don't quarrel, they are all happy with that. Such have not come to the Oba as an issue to be decided.
Well, that's a very good thing, because the position of the common law is that where you do that, and interestingly, the Benin culture and custom is identical with the English position as it used to be in the past. And trust was used as a means to circumvent a number of the challenges that we've been talking about. And I'm trusting and I'm hoping that that is what will happen. The courts are beginning to accept that where there is a direct transfer and it's transparent, not intended to circumvent issues, they will respect that transfer. And so at this point, we're going to take out 2 minutes while we'll call Sean. Sean is a good friend of Purchasing and Grace. He's also a trustee who is settled in Europe. And we have structured a number of assets such that we've removed it from the deceased person. And it's working very well. Interestingly, these are trusts that cuts across the world. Now, living in Benin, you'll be amazed. There are quite a few prominent Benin men who have property across the world. What we've done is to collate the property together, put it under a structure, and then through sophisticated structuring, we have the trustees settled in Europe, controlling the assets here. And you'll be amazed how this works. But I'll take out 2 minutes whilst we call Sean when we come back. Just a 2 minutes break. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. services have grown as our experience in Nigeria has developed. We now feel that we have an extensive and deep knowledge of what clients in Nigeria want, family dynamics, and ensuring that we understand cultures, customs, and, as I said, family dynamics, and we adapt our trust services to work for our clients. Our focus is to provide a global wealth solution for our clients, as often the asset base and the intended beneficiaries are international, meaning that careful planning is needed to ensure that potential issues are mitigated and structures are effective for all the needs of the beneficiaries. That said, we do understand that the majority of our clients' wealth is in Nigeria, and we want to ensure that, that said, particularly focused on ensuring that the solutions around Nigerian assets are correctly structured and protected. We work closely with Purchstone and Gray and Anson Tax to ensure that our solutions are effective from a tax, a legal, a cultural and a custom perspective. Okay, so why is wealth structuring important? I think recently there's been a lot of press. There's quite a powerful story that I've been following, following the sad passing of the famous footballer Diego Maradona, who, very wealthy individual, his estate is worth, estimated to be $100 million US, but unfortunately he had no will, he had no trust, he has quite a large family, and his assets are spread worldwide, and already his lawyers are expressing concerns that they are receiving claims against potential estate, they are seeing tax issues, and their concern is that because no planning was put in place, that the estate will take many years to resolve, and ultimately his children, who he wants to benefit, may receive a very small portion of his wealth because of poor planning. Okay, so as I said, we've been travelling to Lagos for many, many years, and we've been having, obviously, conversations about why succession planning is important. And obviously, quite often we see clients who, over the years, maybe have expressed concern or said that this is something, yes, I need to put in place, but you know, it's for another day. I'm a young individual. Things like this can be put in place in a number of years' time. But I think 2020, with the COVID pandemic, has really changed people's mindset around estate planning. We've been very busy this year talking to our clients about, obviously, the what-if scenario, if something were to happen to you. So obviously, I feel that regardless of age, you need a clear plan on how your assets be passed, who they should benefit, and also how business assets should be passed and how they should be managed in the event of a client's passing. We hear stories, and we've had multiple conversations this year with clients who have built up very successful businesses, and they want an effective structure whereby their business legacy will continue for many years. They want the children to continue the business, to grow it, and obviously work hard in that business. And that can all be dealt with within the structure. Again, it's not only about what the what if happens when you pass. Again, with COVID, we have seen issues around clients who've been incapacitated with illness, for example, COVID, where if assets aren't correctly structured, what we are seeing is that we had examples of a client who had COVID and was on a ventilator for a month, could not operate his business. He could not pay the family expenses because effectively everything was frozen. He didn't have a succession plan, and therefore that caused some real concerns for him and his family at a time when obviously he should be focused on getting well and ensuring that his health improves. So, and again, with maybe not the best planning, liquidity can also be an issue. If assets are not protected by a trust, they fall into the client's estate, and often estates can get quite complicated and protracted when family and business will need those access to those funds immediately. Within a trust arrangement, that can happen. The passing of the settle is a very sad event for the family, but the thing is that the trust continues seamlessly, so that they have access to funds for businesses, for the family, so that things can continue at a difficult time and they don't have those worries that how things are going to be dealt with. So from Zedra, we offer a very wide range of structuring solutions to help our clients to protect their assets and ensure that they are passed to the correct intended beneficiaries. We adapt our solutions. A trust is a vehicle, but obviously it's how it's implemented, and obviously to do that we obviously adapt our structures to meet our client and his family's needs, whilst adhering to cultural and custom perspective. Everything that they want to achieve should be able to be achieved within a trust, so that their assets are distributed in accordance with their wishes and beliefs. Okay, so if we could just maybe move the slides up a little bit. So where to start, I would say. We have regular conversations with people. Obviously, to start with, we really want to understand their requirements from a cultural and customs perspective. Often they can be quite similar, but obviously the client's structuring needs may differ. So typically we will start our discussions with obviously what they want to ultimately achieve, what assets they hold, where they are, because obviously if the assets are often worldwide, so obviously you do need to consider implications in certain jurisdictions where those assets are. Obviously we want to understand how they are held, where they're located, and who the initial and intended beneficiaries of those assets are. So from those discussions, we obviously then look to deliver our trust solution. And whilst a trust is the vehicle, it is a very bespoke arrangement that we put in place to fit our clients' requirements. As I said, in terms of their cultural and customs beliefs, and also to ensure that it is legally correct in their jurisdiction. Okay. So once the structure is established, it is important that we also continue to review. We meet with our clients on a regular basis to review structures, because circumstances often change. So we want to make sure that whilst the trust is put in place, that we meet with them, ensure that it adapts if necessary, it changes to meet the needs, because as I said, on passing off the settler, the important thing is that these assets pass how he intends. Okay. So we have a wide variety of structures, as I said, but one we particularly are focused on in terms of West Africa is what we call a private trust company arrangement. And the private trust company is a very good vehicle that we use and we feel is suitable for our ultra high net worth clients in West Africa, because it can be used to protect the family wealth, including business assets, so they can be structured within the trust. Where a private trust company differs from maybe some of the other trusts that we use is that it allows the family to maintain control over the decisions, because a private trust company, they can act as their own trustees, so it can be the client, his family, and his trusted advisors. So they can sit on the board of the trust company, and they can ultimately make the decisions around those business assets. And obviously, how those assets are passed, and also how, say, businesses are controlled after the settler's passing. So that's a structure that we've been working on with for many years, and we feel it's a very appropriate structure for structuring onshore assets. It can be used to cover global assets. Where Zedra comes in is that for a private trust company to work in a jurisdiction like the Isle of Man, you need to have a regulated trustee in that jurisdiction to provide administration services and make sure that the trust is run effectively and in accordance with trust law. So the key benefits are that the family maintain control over the decisions, whilst you still get the succession, the clear succession planning within that trust, so that the assets pass to the intended beneficiaries, and that can be structured in terms of your cultural and customs beliefs, and also how those businesses will operate both during your lifetime and obviously on passing. So who will step into the patriarch's shoes. Okay. We have worked closely with Perchstone and Grays and Anson Taps to put these type of structures in place and ensure that these structures meet our clients' requirements and are suitable and compliant with all requirements in their country. Okay. Thank you for listening to me today. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. I would be delighted to speak to anybody separately after this workshop and to explain further about what Zedra can do. I'd be delighted to look at your circumstances and obviously family requirements, and we could have a conversation to provide potential solutions for you and highlight any sort of issues or matters that we think that maybe the family need to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Sean has talked about assets and talked about high net worth clients. But the structures that we introduce can be used for very basic problems. And I'll just describe one that you see all the time. This house is not for sale. Usually when you investigate that house that is not for sale, is actually for sale, but those who are disputing the ownership of the house say, pay to me, no other person. So it's an informal way of a caution. Now we had this problem in Bielsa, and we solved it through structuring. What we simply did was to contact everybody who claimed that they have an interest in the house, got each of them to forfeit their rights to the property, but then paid the money into an account, an escrow account, trust account, such that when you succeed in the litigation, you have access to those funds. In Bielsa State, this was a lot of money because it was property for a particular transaction, LNG project. So we paid in, I don't know, 1, 2 billion, can't remember how much it was. That community or those communities are still disputing the ownership, but the funds are generating interest, which is being used for the benefit of everyone. So if you have, this house is not for sale, children are not going to school, so we put the funds in an account, generating some interest, and you use it to pay for all the children from the family. Whoever succeeds can still go and access those funds. Those are the sort of structuring we introduce. And there's nothing about lispendis there because each one forfeits his rights. The right is not totally forfeited. It's converted to liquidity. That's all. So whoever wins access it. So this is the sort of structure that we work with people like Zedra and deal with assets that are of higher value. When the assets are of a low value, We can do it ourselves with local trustees here. As I say, all the houses littered with the word, this house is not for sale, is dead capital. Capital is dead. And it has a multiplier effect because you cannot use that asset to access credit in the bank. Whereas in other parts of the world, you can do so. Now let me go to a more topical issue. And I'm going to go back to, well, I'm going to introduce again Mrs. Stella Aigbe Esquire, legal practitioner, who will be talking to us about some of the difficulties that women face who are married to the culture. She's the president of the group of wives married to the Enogies, which is an equivalent of a duke. So I'd like to hear your views, madam, on the question to how women are taken care of, because there's no express provision as far as the custom is concerned. Thank you very much.
Good morning, my lords, my chiefs, the moderator, my former Honorable Commissioner for Justice, my mommy, all protocol duly and respectfully observed. Though it's a very interesting topic when I was called upon, and as a legal practitioner though, but I'll speak from the angle of the wife of a duke. I'll talk more from the angle of the Benin customary law, how it affects women. Naturally, you know that we Africans, we observe a patrilineal style of living. When a man dies, if you look at it these days, the issue of inheritance is a major challenge we are going through in Africa, Benin to be precise. And most of the times, the people who are the receiving ends when issues like that comes up are the women. Maybe as a wife, as a widow to the deceased, or maybe as a girl child, as a female child to the deceased. And it flows down from Uhure. Where it's coming from? Uhure. What is Uhure? Uhure is a wooden staff of office. I'll call it a staff of office because it goes with an authority given to the first surviving male child to the deceased. Though this will come up after the necessary rights, burial rights, have been met, then go ahead to do the, when you say, permit me to use, sometimes I'll use the Benin language, but I'll interpret it so that for those people that don't understand Benin. Ukome. After the burial rites have been done, then the first male surviving child does the Ukome. That is where the Uhure is handed over to him. And when that is handed over to him, he is more like a mediator now between the family and the ancestors of the deceased. That a woman cannot be entitled to. Even though when a man dies and died maybe all female children, for that to go to the first female surviving child after the burial rites have been conducted, it will go to the deceased younger surviving brother, because it's a no-go area for a woman. And flowing from that, that is where inheritance comes in. If you look at it, Though the Benin native law has its own uniqueness, but the way it is done, for example, it has to do with families, different families, especially when you have a greedy first son. That's where the problem comes in. When you don't have a greedy first son, and most times it's both greedy and lazy, both usually go together, then you now start having issues, hardship coming on the women. But at the same time, when you have a family, a greedy, like I said before, when you have a greedy male child, you have challenges. But when you have the type that is very easygoing, it carries the sisters along. And before you know it, the whole thing is done without any hitch. These days, it is so bad that when a woman is married, if she doesn't have a son, it's like she's in hell. Some women, they are desperate because they know the implication. The another challenge we are having is the African setting is a polygamous setting. When a man has different wives, maybe he has 2, 3 wives, and he dies and property is being shared. The wives who were there for the deceased, who have suffered so much to assist their husband rather, will only be seen and not to be heard. Instead, their children, they do it in form of gates, which is called uro in Benin parlance. They do it in form of gates. A gate where maybe the wife, one of the wives is not fortunate to have a male child. Then the ones that are fortunate to have a male child, they are the ones that are most times benefit. So coming down to Igilbe, I'll talk a bit on Igilbe too, as it affects women. When a man dies, and maybe he died leaving children or female, some families will come up to say that, especially when the property the man left behind is a property that he inherited from his father as an Igiobe. And unfortunately, the man didn't have a male child before he died. If that becomes an issue, because they believe that the property, after burial rites have been done, they believe that the property cannot go to a female child, because automatically it goes to the family where the female child is married. That's another challenge. So there are so many other challenges, hardship that women are going through. But I still believe that it still boils down to the type of family. The type of family. Sometimes the Okaigbe, that's the head of the family, will be magnanimous enough because he doesn't want rancor in the family. So he comes down to use his discretion, not going 100% with the native law and custom.
Augusta.
Because he wants peace in that family. So they use their discretion to alienate property, maybe gate by gate in the case of a polygamous home. If it's a monogamous home, they say, okay, all female children, share it according to seniority. So that is what we find. So there are so many other hardships. Like for me, I would advise that if you have a female child, the best thing is give the child a good education, a sound education, and forget about my father has this, my father has that, because it has really sent so many persons to the grave. You see, where they have issue of inheritance, you see, before you know it, the first son goes mad. The first male child, just mysteriously just goes mad. Then before you know it, some other things start happening. All boils down to inheritance. Like I said before, some of these things, anything that change is the only thing that is dynamic. So I know that maybe with time, it will be looked into, because some of the laws is where we were born into, and we are still managing, but it's causing a lot of, some part of it, hardship on some of the women. Where you find out that a greedy male surviving child, after he has done all the burial, corner, and all the other things that he's supposed to conduct, he takes over the assets and jettisons the responsibility. Sometimes they send even away their own mother, who is supposed to be in the house where the man died, where the man lived and died. They send away their mother, put the house for sale. So they send away their stepmothers, send away their younger ones. Like I said, the only thing that is dynamic is change. And I know with time, some of these hardships that women face is something that will be addressed at the appropriate time. Like Uncle was talking about how Gilbert was having issues when they said the senior son should go and take the ancient building. But during Obayerewa's time, he was able to change it, using his discretion to change it, where to a very large extent there was peace in Benin, because it was really causing a lot of rancor then. So he was able to do it. And I know with time, because modernization has taken place and so many things are changing. So with time, I know they will look into, it's something that will be looked into, where as the traditional, as the native law and custom is being changed, then the courts in turn will affirm some of this native law and custom. So we know we have a very digital Oba who is a modernized Oba, and with time, as I said before, something may be done about it. Oba Atokbe is so the hardship women face when it comes to succession is something that cannot be overemphasized. You see, during the burial rites, the woman is it's the normal traditional thing for a woman to do. She's somewhere, then all the children, they are the ones participating and all that. Nobody talks about giving the widow anything, because they believe that whatever is accrued to the children automatically is for her too. But sometimes you have irresponsible children that are so insensitive to the welfare of their mothers, and I mean their biological mother. So when the man dies and the children they inherit, everybody forgets about their mother. And meanwhile, that house that the first son has inherited is a house that was built with the sweat of both the father and the mother. So that's another major challenge that women face when it comes to succession. So for me, distinguished audience, like I was saying before, good education is the key. Some people believe that females, they are meant to be in the kitchen. But times have changed. You have notable people that without inheritance or succession, they have been able to work on their own and achieve good assets for themselves. But like my mom is seated there, she will not be talking about inheritance. She's a woman. And what's making her to be like this is her educational qualification. You have the VC to Uniben, Professor Mrs. Lillian Salami. So many of them, Dr. Okonjo Iweala. So many of them, too numerous to mention. They're not talking about inheritance. So, because inheritance is causing a lot of problem in Benin. Like the moderator was saying, you go to, you see, this house is not for sale, this house is not for sale. When you see this house is not for sale, you know that there's an issue in that house.
Yes.
When you go to court, look at the cost list, the civil matters. Out of 5, 3 has to do with inheritance issue. I've seen a case where a mother and a son, they are in court over inheritance issue. That's part of the reason, that's part of the challenge that the women face. Thank you very much.
Yes, I wasn't going to interrupt you because I'd like Professor Yinka Omorogbe to join in this discuss. But I will do that after our tax experts have said a few things, because some of the issues you raised are extremely topical. And the solution is the failure of the council to have a process by which you change laws. What we do in law is constantly we subject law to review. We must constantly subject custom to review. The absence of that is the challenge that you've identified. But this discussion cannot take place effectively without Professor Yinka Omorogbe and perhaps my late mother-in-law, who's a very strong woman. My father always said she was 3 men in 1 woman. Such a woman was not interested in inheritance. In fact, she was dictating the pace of the law. But I'll come back to that. At this point, I want to call on our tax experts, Mr. Yahaya. Now, this house is not for sale. Rightly as Mrs. Aigbe Esquire identified, it's usually as a result of some inheritance dispute. But also sometimes it is just the fact that the beneficiaries are unable to raise the duties that are supposed to be paid before that house passes on to the beneficiaries. So I'd like to call on Mr. Yah to tell us very briefly on the tax treatment that is applicable to a particular estate plan. Point being that if you fail to have a proper estate plan, you will plan to fail because the estate duty will be so enormous that the gift might never come to you. So let's have Mr. Yahaya. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suleiman Yahya, and I work with Anderson Tax here in Lagos. Indeed, it's been a very interesting conversation that we've been having this morning, and just to join, my own words to, what has been said earlier. If the host will please permit me to share my screen. I have a few slides, just...
Yes, you can share your screen now.
Okay, great. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Can you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, sir.
Okay, so I proceed. So very quickly, I'd just like to start my short presentation with just a quote from Robert Kiyosaki. Robert is, an American writer. And in one of his writings, he said, it's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep, how hard it works for you, and how many generations you keep it for. So if you look at this quote, it's basically at the heart of the conversations that we're having this morning. Essentially, speaking to, the preservation of wealth and how you go about preserving that wealth to ensure that it succeeds this generation. And Sean's presentation kind of speaks to some of the modern methods that are available somehow, which will help navigate some of the challenges that we've been talking about. So basically what I'll be doing very quickly this morning is to look at the tax implications of some of these options for wealth succession or wealth transfer. Like they say in the tax balance, that if you run a company, the taxman is some sort of pseudo shareholder in your company, because he is entitled to 32% of your profits. So as you begin to put in your structures in place, whether it is a wealth succession structure, or generally is a structure around making your business more efficient, the tax considerations of such structures are typically very important. And to do that this morning, we'll just look very briefly at what income profiles are, touch basically on personal income taxes in Nigeria, since the subject of our discussion basically revolves around individuals who will naturally be taxed under the personal income tax. We examine a few options. Like Sean mentioned, there are a wide variety of options to achieve wealth succession, but again, it all depends on the facts and circumstances. But we'll just examine some of the very few common ones, and we just conclude very. So, very briefly, generally, income will typically be in so many forms, right? It could be dividends, where you invested or you bought shares of a company, and then you pay dividend, you are paid dividend. It could be rental income, say you own assets, be it property or equipment, which is on lease, and you earn, income from them. Also be from directors' fees. Some people, sit on the boards of a lot of companies, and they earn, directors' fees, as their compensation. And now, those income profile, it's quite numerous depending on the kind of economic activity that you're really engaged in. So generally, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of personal income tax in Nigeria, and basically just to say, so who is taxable under the personal income taxes? Basically, so you'll have your individuals, a government law firm, for instance, it's a partnership, he will also be taxable under the personal income tax. You have your business ventures and your unincorporated entities. So all these categories of people will be taxable under the personal income taxes. And what does the personal income tax seek to tax, right? So basically, it looks at your employment income, it looks at your benefit in kind, it looks at your business profit, and your investment income. So, if you look at the personal income taxes, largely, it seeks to tax you, on what we call your worldwide income. So as long as you are a resident in Nigeria, irrespective of where you earn income, such income will be liable to tax in Nigeria. And that's why it's important, that as we look at some of these wealth succession plans, we also look at what the impact of tax will be. To the extent that you are a resident in Nigeria, you then want to structure them in a form that by the time you are receiving those income, it's either the taxes are minimized or they are actually exempted from tax based on the tax laws. So in terms of the tax rate, so how is the tax rate being applied, right? So generally, the personal income tax rate in Nigeria is graduated, is based on your income. So the higher your income, the higher the taxes that you are paid. So say you earn maybe about 300,000 naira in a year, the tax that will be applicable, it's going to be 7%. If you then go a notch above it and then earn, let's say, 600,000, the next 300,000 will be taxed at 11%, and then on, up to when you then get, any amount you then earn above say 3.2 million will be subjected to tax at 24%. But if effectively, right, we say that, the effective tax rate in Nigeria, if you take account of all these graduated rates, will be about 18.9%. But the tax law also provides for certain reliefs, right, which, will be granted against the income that you've earned. So basically just lay the background, in terms of how, tax has been applied in Nigeria. So, with respect to employment income, for instance, I did talk about the income streams. And if you look at your employment income, for instance, let's say you are into a paid employment, typically you'll be subjected to what we call the pay-as-you-earn tax. Now, the pay-as-you-earn tax, usually that responsibility for deduction and administration, rests with the employer. And for business people who earn business income, who earn directors' fees, and all of those, who are not in paid employment, will typically be subjected to tax under a regime that is referred to as direct assessment. Like the word says, you more or less report all your income, and expenses to the tax authority, and then the tax authority will then assess you to tax, and then after which you settle. But what's important, especially for business income, is to be careful about the tax footprint that you are creating across the country. Because what the tax authority does sometimes, because of the data they have, is to more or less gross up your revenue, and sometimes you realize that you're paying additional tax liabilities. And some of these income streams I've highlighted here. Hopefully I can share these slides, and we'll look at them in detail. But particularly in terms of trust, which is one of the subject of conversation here. Basically, largely in terms of the taxation of trust, the trust itself is not taxed, but what is then being taxed is the income that you derive from the trust, and then it's going to be taxed, largely in the hands of the beneficiaries of that trust income in Nigeria. So, I did speak about some of these wealth transfer options. I've largely categorized them into two. There are some of the traditional methods, and there are some other methods that we're seeing, which more or less have been effective, at tackling some of the challenges that we see with the traditional methods. And I think Sean has spoken extensively about the private trust. We'll just examine, the tax implications. So looking at the traditional method, we have the wills, where, we say that, before a deceased, someone passed on, you'll have written your will clearly stating how, your assets will be distributed. And then we also have instances where, wills aren't written, but are left to the customary laws of inheritance. And I think this kind of falls under some of the subject matter that we've been talking about in the morning, especially the associated challenges. But in terms of how do you then resolve some of the challenges that we've been talking about, so there are options, again, like I said, depending on the facts and circumstances and what you seek to achieve. You could consider setting up limited liability companies to hold your assets. You could consider private trust. You could consider also having those assets purchased directly in the name of beneficiaries. But the options that you choose will largely depend on what you're seeking to achieve. So largely in terms of looking at wills, so clearly, what are the benefits of having wills, in place? You just look at it, and then one of it clearly is that the wealth of the deceased is going to be distributed in a manner that the deceased has indicated, and also has its advantages, but some of the drawbacks also is that in terms of the actual transfer will only happen you know, when after death, you know, when the event has occurred. So, you know, there's also that, you know, concern as to, you know, that assurance that the wealth is going to be distributed in the manner that the deceased wish. You know. So largely, what are the the tax implications here to consider? You know, if you choose to adopt the option of will as the method for passing on wealth to the next generation. Clearly, you know, there is the estate fee charge of 10%, you know, and some of the processing fees, you know, that will also be applicable, you know, once the administrator is trying to execute the estate of the deceased, you know. So you will also be subject to some of these laws, you know, taxes, the capital gains tax, you know, stamp duties, there will be registration fees and all of that. So those are some of the considerations, you know, that will be applicable in terms of, you know, now if we look at, you know, having, you know, the inheritance, so clearly, you know, when you leave it to the customary law, you know, to handle, you know, these issues of inheritance, you know, the wealth still remains with the family, but clearly some of the drawbacks, it's, you know, conflicts, especially, you know, where some of the issues with are present. Sometimes, you know, you look at fairness, you look at equity, you know, and all of the issues that come with it. But in the end, right, similar charges, because in the end where transfer still needs to happen, you know, to the next gen, some of these taxes which we spoke about under will also be applicable. So I did talk about options where, you know, can more sort of mitigate some of the risks that we've looked about. And one of it is to set up a limited liability company. In this instance, that company is going to hold the assets, you know, of the person, and then the beneficiaries will only be shareholders in that company, right? So effectively, you know, if you look at the form of it, the companies own the assets, but in substance, actually, the shareholders who own the company more or less are the real beneficiaries of those assets. And the benefit from a tax perspective of this mode of wealth transfer is such that currently, as we have it in our tax laws in Nigeria, sale of shares, right? It's exempt from taxes in Nigeria. So what then happens is that as you begin to move those assets, you know, from one generation to the other, all you then need to do is to execute your share transfer documents, which are exempt from taxes, and then that way you're able to, you know, avoid most of the challenges that you see with some of the options that we discussed. But also the initial transfer, you know, to the company may also be exposed to some of these, you know, estate fee that we talked about earlier. But in the case of, you know, listed companies, if for any reason the company is listed, clearly some of the charges that are applicable, the transaction taxes that are applicable will apply. One of the tax implications here also is that where you have a limited liability company holding your assets, that company will then also be subject to filing its tax returns. But it may not have any tax payable because largely what the company will be earning as revenue will be rental income. And those rental income that have suffered tax, you know, is deemed to be frank investment income. And based on the Nigerian taxes, tax law, no further tax, you know, will be applicable on this method. I mean, on the income. So one of the other options also is to purchase the assets directly in the name of the beneficiaries. So ab initio, you know, the beneficiaries, you know, own these assets. So there isn't any tax implications as such, you know, under these options. But if we go to the trust, you know, the private trust arrangement, like I did mention earlier, you know, so again, in setting up a trust, just like Sean mentioned earlier, there are quite a number of considerations. Obviously, one of the considerations you want to look at is where the assets are located. You even want to see whether, depending on the location of the assets, you want to have the trust situated in Nigeria, or you want to consider some offshore jurisdictions that that will give you some form of tax efficiency, right, and even operational efficiency. Yeah, and one of the benefits of this setting of the trust, which Sean has clearly articulated, is ability to have control, because you then get your beneficiaries, to be trustees more or less, and then effectively control the asset. But in terms of the tax implication, now, depending if you earn a trust income, now depending on how that income is being classified, then that will largely determine, how the tax impact will go. So clearly, for instance, in Nigeria, if those trust income are classified as dividends, then clearly, those dividends will already have suffered taxes, and they will not suffer further taxes in the hands of the beneficiary. So the trust will continue to manage the assets, generate the income, and then distribute whatever income that you have to the beneficiaries as dividend. From the Nigerian tax law perspective, such dividends, whether you earn them from Nigeria or you earn them abroad and then bring them into Nigeria through the official channel, will not be subject to tax in Nigeria again. So that way you're able to manage your exposure to taxes. But one thing to note here is that the beneficiaries, especially if you are a resident in Nigeria, have the responsibility to file their tax returns to the tax authority in Nigeria. And like I said, you just need to give account of all your earnings, and look at your expenses, and then pay the tax due to the tax authority. And generally, again, because of the fluidity of trust, generally you can determine how you want the trust to run, and then whether you want the individuals to go and pay their taxes, or you want the trust itself to deduct the taxes and remit on your behalf. All of this, can be articulated in the trust deed. But in terms of conclusion, just to join my voice to some of the conversations that we've been having, given all of the challenges we have with inheritance, the truth of the matter is that wealth transfers need to start happening even long before the demise of a person, and you then need to look at the options that you'll explore to manage the tax liabilities. And largely, like Robert says, it's about how you keep this wealth, and for how many generations that wealth continue to survive. And we have instances in Nigeria of very high net worth individuals 20, 30 years ago, but currently, as of today, you can't really trace the wealth of the family again, and all due to so many other reasons may have gone under. And the charge to most people is that you leave a legacy and not a mess. Like you see, with court cases, infightings among families, and all of that. So I think at this point, maybe I'd just like to take a stop here, and we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you. I think the point to note, just before we go back to the earlier discussion, is that the absence of a proper plan, the absence of a tax treatment, not giving it a thought, has resulted in businesses in this part of the world not being transferred from one generation to another. So you see the patriarch of the family builds a huge business, and after that business is built, he gets his first son, who may have no expertise in running the business. and the first son runs it aground. What we are saying is that if you infuse an effective structure, what you will then have is that the children, including the first son, begin to derive benefits from that asset, because it has been structured in such a way that you've introduced a trust, the business moves from one to another. So if you're talking about Guinness, for example, the Guinness family, and I can name many others, they've been running for many years. But in Africa, in Nigeria, and in Benin, I can't recall any businesses that has transited from one generation to the other effectively. So I think this is something we have to start thinking about, because it does have socio-cultural implications where you cannot develop a private business from one level to another. Thank you very much, Yahaya. There are many intricacies that we'll talk about, and I'm sure questions will be permitted. So please don't walk away. We have some questions already we got from those who are participating or watching us by Zoom. And I know there are many who are agitated in the audience who will permit questions. Let me now turn to a very interesting speaker, an outstanding speaker, very strong views, former Attorney General of Edo State, a woman of substance, I say. Let's have your views drawing from where Mrs. Aigbe stopped in terms of the discrimination against women and the culture of inheritance, culture of Benin and inheritance. Your views, ma'am.
Thank you very much, my moderator, distinguished persons, my lords here, all the distinguished persons here, my big cousin here. I'm very happy to make some statements. You've already introduced me in such a way that I might end up sounding boring, because you've made me sound so interesting. But I think I'll start off from what Mrs. Aigbe said as well. And I'll say that without mincing words, it's a very harsh climate for women. Very, very harsh climate. And I think there are certain things we need to understand as well. One, let me talk about change. When you see a harsh climate, you want to change it if you're reasonable and it impacts upon you. So I think that is what we probably need to work on. And I have to say that change is not going to come from Omonoba. Change is coming from the people. You speak a way, you act a way, the Oba hears it, and he moves with you. But since we're not in a monarchy, but we are in a democracy, the people around the systems hear you, and you try to impact on the systems and effect some change. So you try to effect change at the systemic level, the larger systemic level, but also within the culture. How do you get change within the culture? By getting the people to think differently and accept certain things that we have subconsciously accepted and which are not really helping us. You know, we've talked about inheritance. Inheritance has caused us big problems. Like everything with negatives, it has had great positives. I believe, for example, that the inheritance system in Nigeria has been padded against women to a great extent. But in Benin, there's one positive thing we did as a result of that. And that is that those of us who could have property now went out to ensure that we had property. So as a result of that, you will find that more than other ethnic groups, Benin women have property. So that for us was positive. But again, let me go to the negative aspect of that for those women who don't have anything. One needs to realize that this system, this Igiogbe system, leads to many, many women being thrown into the streets in the real sense, especially when you are talking about the irresponsible first son who has not imbibed the fact that the responsibility, the privileges go with big responsibility. And so there are all these women that marry a person, basically very loveless marriage with many, many women there, you know, and they are never at ease when they don't have that first son, which is what endangers the first son, like has been said before. So they are not at ease. see, and if they can't see, they can see other people, because people are dying all around, and they can see that, oh, this chief, something died, and his wives were automatically destitute, and the first son didn't care two hoots. So they're desperate to have property, but they don't, they haven't had any means of livelihood. They didn't work. Some of these women, they were not as enterprising as some other ones. And I believe that that has fed the trafficking in women, because these women who desperately want houses now send their children to work in this particular way. Okay, it's prostitution. They know it's prostitution, but after all of us women, we are prostitutes. At the end of the day, you sleep with the man for your housing, your bread and butter, and whatever. This is how it's rationalized to a great extent. So I honestly think that at a deeper level, amongst the very, very poor, this human trafficking trend that we have had in around here has been fed by that, because you will find that it's always a thread coming up. The girl travels, and then the girl is building a house for the mother, and the mother that was homeless becomes a woman with a house. So we need to look at that negative aspect as well and see how to address it, because for me it's so clear that that is one of the negative things that has impacted on what has happened in Edo now, Edo State, in this area. Now, again, another thread running through our inheritance system has a lot to do with the status of women. And this is very, very hidden in subtle fashions. It's hidden amongst those of us that will be characterized as the elite. But it's a very, very big issue that we all need to address. And we need to address it and strike it at its root, because it's not my fear, but what I mind a lot is the fact that many of us women that are not in those categories often forget, because of our backgrounds, we were not treated a particular way. And since this society is very stratified, if you are not in the lower rungs of society, but you happen to be in the higher rungs, you are treated differently. So sometimes you can forget these things. Sometimes when you are given property, inter vivos, you can forget certain things. But in fact, the society is really, really stacked against women. And I think we need to take that into consideration, because what is happening is that a lot of us are becoming what you would call honorary men, what I call honorary men. And it's a very dangerous position to be in, because it doesn't help other women that are coming on. It is like the female judges who you will call my lady, and she's offended by being called my lady. She does not realize that being an honorary man, and when they say no ladies at the bar, no ladies at the bench, you are saying ladies are too inferior to be there. So when you refuse to be called my lady, it's actually an insult to your gender. But you don't realize it here, or realize that all over the world, my ladies are everywhere, because it is seen as a gender insult. But still here, you take my lord, I've earned it. I have had friends, friends, senior judges tell me I earned that position. I earned that position, and they can't see. So I think we need to understand, because many of us here are honorary men in that way. We can't be honorary men. We have to be women. I realize, my Lord, Honorable Justice Courage Ogbebo, my Lord, I'm sure that's Justice Omotosho. Yes, all of us, we can enter anywhere. My sister here, Mrs. Igwe, we can enter anywhere a man can enter. We can work anywhere, we can do anything. We have no limitations, because we just don't have them. We're women, we are human beings. It therefore means that what the man can do, I can do. God didn't give me a limitation. Extra strength does not equate to being bigger or better. We need to understand this, so that the woman that is just coming up can realize that we're the same. So if we have this underlying, we will be able to attack what we're talking about correctly. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because many women, Benin women have a lot of property. Many women that didn't go to school still have a lot of property here. And what you are seeing amongst the women with property is that they are behaving like men with Igiogbe. When you look at the way they divide their property when they are leaving, they still, in many instances, still give a prominence to their son over their daughter. And it is because that thought of the female being below is ingrained. It cannot be because the property is going to go outside, because they know property doesn't go outside, quote, when you are a mother, because they're with your children. So what am I saying? I think the mindset is very, very important. And I think that there are many things we need to do, but there are also many things that we can do. And we know that at the end of the day, the custodians of the culture will be our partners, because they know that all we're talking about is for the advancement of society.
Well, I thank you very much, Professor Moro. Thank you. You introduced a dimension that I'd never given a thought to, that trafficking, particularly of women, may be as a result of the fact that women do not have any rights of inheritance, and those who even have those who are fortunate enough, or those who are unfortunate, might send their female children abroad so that they also can climb the status by acquiring property, trafficking the female abroad, and then sending money back home. Now, that is a big problem. It's a socio-cultural problem. And I don't think anyone, including the Oba of Benin, will refuse to pay attention to anything that would enhance our status, especially the girl child. The Oba of Benin has been doing quite a lot. Because of that fact, isn't it time for us to have a mechanism by which we begin to investigate some of the customs that are creating socio-cultural problems, such as this nature? And I think, because if you speak to most people, they are accepting that the custom may be discriminatory against women. But the process of change is unknown, is uncertain. There's no methodology to change the custom. And I will go back to you, Mr. Danine, because this is where I think we have the problem. You were secretary to the Oba, and a very dynamic one. And that's because his change was dependent on his own personality rather than a structure. Isn't it time for us to introduce some mechanism that allows for constant review? Because what we do as lawyers is to constantly review the law so that it adapts to the changes and modern time changes. We don't have that in custom. What's your reaction to that, sir?
Well, changes are there. Maybe the speed you want to see it is not visible. All right. Oba Palace, the way you used to know it 10 years ago, if you go there now, you have seen new structures. That is a change. And the chiefs were able to convince Oba Erediawa to moderate certain aspects. I'm sure if they approach Oba Ewa about certain areas, they will sit down, look at it, and see the benefit for the future. I'm sure the room is there for moderate approach to be applied, such that what looks like the very bad angles can be more accommodating.
And I like that, sir. And when we hold these workshops and seminars, what I always say to my colleagues, at least at Purchton and Grace now, in association with the government and the government, is to take something out. What we should be taking out of this discourse is the possibility of setting up a group who will work with the palace chiefs and then make a representation to the Oba of Benin, such that the discriminations that are so obvious are reconsidered. My dad considered doing something. It's very interesting the way he thought. He said, look, since our custom is dependent a lot on the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, when you say a man, it includes the female gender, a woman. And therefore, maybe when you said the hure is only for the man, it actually meant the male and the female gender. And he wanted to go to court for an interpretation of that nature. And that was because there was no mechanism. It was such a hot topic that he did speak to one or two people and he never proceeded. I think that we will do what we say we want to do. We will liaise with some of the chiefs, but we must introduce a mechanism that constantly looks at the system and consider whether or not it's archaic.
Well, I am smiling because I look at you as seeing beneath through western window. Let me tell you, there are so many things you cannot involve women in Benin. You cannot have a woman be part of a Godion in any village because there are issues that should guide that. So they are 100% out. The areas that there can be some levels of adjustment, I'm sure as we bring in more and more educated chiefs, they should be able to sit down and put us together to find a way forward. So, my sister is whispering.
Yes.
Let's catch it.
The professors just asked, what will you do when a woman like Margaret Thatcher becomes governor of the state and needs to attend the Council of Traditional Rulers meetings? There's one point, sir. We can maintain the tradition. I'm not suggesting that we turn the tradition around. But if we introduce trust into it, what will then happen is that if the man is the only one who's permitted by tradition because the ancestors are watching and may be unhappy, if you then satisfy those rights, you hold whatever assets you have on trust for those who may not be permitted to partake in the title. So there are various ways we can structure and maintain the tradition as long as we have the broad-mindedness to do so, sir.
Well, it's a good language, but when it comes to reality, it's a different matter. In my university, we used to have a professor, I won't mention his name because you will know him, but he used to tell us that he was Professor so-so-so. He came from Obosai. Obosai is Obosi is a village not far from Onitsha. Instead of calling it Obosi, he was calling it Obosai. The Igbos felt offended that because you trained overseas, you are calling Obosi Obosai. So we have to be also careful how we make our speed. As Canon Adelaja will always tell us, hasty, slowly. If you approach it too sharply, the chiefs will stand against it.
Very well. Let me, as we round up, I'm going to give each of the speakers a few seconds, last statements on this platform. The questions I will put to you are drawn from the questions on the Zoom platform. The question really is partly what we've said, that where a first son attempts to inherit property and that property is subject of trust, will the first son be permitted? The second question is the custom not repugnant at this point, since it is extremely discriminatory against female? The custom actually, if it's well analyzed, is not as discriminatory as it is practiced. Let me explain that again. So if a first son, as the law says, takes subject to the liabilities, in other words, he's compelled to take care of his sisters, then the custom might not be that repugnant. It is because Mr. Danine had said that there are no consequences. There must be consequences if you have a right and you default from that right. Because there are no consequences, that's why people get away with it, and it's encouraged. So the custom in itself is not repugnant. What is repugnant, perhaps, is the way in which we've applied it. But let me let each of you speak on something that is so strong that we can take away. Can I start with Mrs. Aigwe, please? I'll let Mr. Danine have the last word because we think that you can make those changes. So let me start with Mrs. Aigwe. Go ahead. Just a few seconds. What would you like to see change the most? Where would you like to see change the most?
Like I said before, where I like to see change the most is to ameliorate the sufferings of the women when it comes to succession. Like we analyzed just now how some women are thrown on the streets. She, like, not just the moderator alone, she opened my eyes to it, as the Honorable former commissioner, that the issue of inheritance is actually what made some girl child to travel, because they foresee that in the nearest future, when their father dies, their mothers may be thrown on the streets. So they go out there to make sure they build a house. Most of them, they don't think of building for themselves. They think of building for their mothers.
Correct.
So that is one thing. Like she also said, there must be a voice, a common voice. There are certain things you cannot change in the custom, like Uncle just said. Like in the palace, what's it called now? I've forgotten the name now. The chambers. There's a chamber in the palace that a woman doesn't go there. What's the name?
There's a consultation in tradition.
I've forgotten, but I'd like to mention it so that people will know. A woman will not go there. A guamaton. It's not something you can change. It's the custom and it's the custom.
Right.
A woman does not go to a guamaton. If she even has, several times, that is the chambers where His Royal Majesty attends to issues. If a woman is to be called as a witness, they send chiefs out, relay the message to the chiefs, who in turn comes back to the Guamaton. So those are not the time we are talking about. You cannot change that. That is the custom. But we are talking about changes that can ameliorate the sufferings, the hardship on the women. Like she said, a voice. There must be a voice.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Prof, and I know that this is a very, very topical issue for you, but I need you in 2 seconds to tell me where you like to see change the most.
Well, I'm very preoccupied with change generally. It has to come first from the mindsets of the people. It's first a realization of equality. So in a nutshell, I would say that is it. But I believe that there are certain things that just happened. Characteristic of custom is fluidity. Change is actually one of the characteristics. So there's nothing that cannot be changed. Tomorrow, that room can become open for women. And the question I posed, you know, I don't even have to say, just let us have a woman governor and a woman president, and let me see how many elders' rooms are closed to the women. So,
and very soon, the women tend to be better custodians of assets. It's very likely that we'll have a woman president, and there might be a change. Before I finish with Mr. Danine, I know that our colleagues and our friends, Sean is all the way in Europe. I'll just say something so that we keep time. He said something which I don't know if anyone captured. The private trust company is something which is not very familiar here, but it's something which we have found great comforts with a diseased, well, before he becomes diseased, he partakes in running a trust. Usually where the settler and the trustee are made, that's not a trust in the true sense. But with a private trust company, he can actually partake and influence it. I would say for me, that's the most important thing I take away. And as far as tax is concerned, and I'm trying to keep time, as far as tax is concerned, I think one of the points that was made was that you must give it a thought. There's a process that was recommended that you put your assets in the company and then the shares are held by the beneficiaries, or you transfer the asset directly to the beneficiary. The problem with that is that when you transfer the asset through, or when the asset is purchased in the name of the beneficiary through, you diminish your tax obligation as a result. But what if that beneficiary turns around, and it's happened before, the child becomes recalcitrant and tells the father to leave the house since he's the owner. That's why trust is still the best thing to do in those circumstances, because unless the trust is an irrevocable trust, you can always turn the trust around when the child starts misbehaving. And I tell you, if a child knows that he has property subject to conditions, he will ensure that those conditions are complied with. So let me end with you, sir. You were secretary to the Oba Eredewa. And he was very accommodating to change. That was as a result of his personality. What are we going to do to persuade our present Oba, Royal High Majesty, that some of our customs, we retain those ones that you say cannot be subject to change because they do not affect what we're talking about. What do we do for those ones that we can change and enhance the position of the girl child and diminish the position of the recalcitrant first son? What do we need to do?
Yes. First of all, the word you use, persuade, cannot sustain because he has not even been approached at all. Usually, the Iyase, if you know his praise name, you will know that it is his responsibility to approach for change or to speak the voice of the ordinary man in the kingdom. But the Iyase we have is old now. He may not be able to take too much responsibilities. But I believe that if the Iyase and the top echelon of the chief's hierarchy come together and identify areas that we need to have second look, the Oba will see with them. He will see with them. Nobody thought of Aredewa was going to effect changes, but he did. He was a sticker for tradition, but he was also convinced that certain things had come to the end of the road. So I'm sure that situation will come.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, moderator, sorry. I was expecting someone among us to trash out sharing of properties of diseased mothers. That was not handled.
Thank you, sir. You can deal with it very quickly because I did raise it when I started, but I do apologize. Go on ahead, sir. How?
He said I want to do it, but I was saying that the women talked about women, but that aspect seemed to have dropped out. So now they have been overweight on the men's side. What happens if a mother dies? How do the children share her property? Taking into consideration that pre-colonial Benin, women didn't have properties.
Correct.
But now they have. So what happens when she dies?
Well, that's what I think Professor Yinka Omorobe said. Most times, the women are indicating that they would prefer that it be shared by primogeniture, which is interesting. The son takes the largest share. The Egbers, when they share it, they do the same thing, even though the custom never addressed it. So today, the way it is done, it depends on who the Egber is of presiding over that burial. That's my understanding, but you can help us.
What is there is that the property of a deceased mother is shared proportionately in order of seniority. Every child has right to inherit something. You can't deny any child. There is no Igiobe. So the first one cannot breach hits on anybody. They share, but proportionately in order of seniority.
Very interesting, and we need to establish that because as we knew before now, the custom did not address that at all.
No, because they didn't have properties.
Correct.
Yes.
Let me give an opportunity to our friends who are resource persons participating by Zoom. I don't know if you have any closing comments, Sean and Yahaya, in that order. If you can hear me, Sean, you can go ahead. Sean, you muted. I simply said, do you have any closing remarks as we end? All right, we seem to be having some technical problems. Well, okay, I think, as I did say earlier on, the concept of trust is something that we would advocate very strongly to deal with many of the problems. The time has come for us to close, but, oh, I'm so sorry. Question from the audience. I was being particular about time. I am so sorry. Do we have any questions? Yes, or comments? Yes. All right, we'll take two. I'm so sorry. I was looking at the time. Please, my lord, go ahead.
Hello, Isaro.
Yes, please. First, my comments. I want to comment briefly on the issue of change. Yes, change is the only thing that is constant. My dear daddy talked about the change that our revered Oba Erediawa tried to bring about. That is giving the option of choosing between a dilapidated Igyobe and a fanciful house in Ikoyi. Yes. That right now will not stand in our courts. That change he was trying to bring right now, if that issue comes up right now, the children of that disease, they are going to still say that one is the Igyobe. But how did this our Igyobe issue come about? The Igyobe law was entrenched in our law because somebody went to court and said this is Igyobe. And then evidence from the palace and the chiefs, they gave that evidence. This is what is Igyobe. This is what constitutes Igyobe. And it went up to the Supreme Court and it became the law. So if that is to be the law, that a first son has the option to choose, somebody has to approach the court with such. And then it will go on, and it will be entrenched as the law. For now, it will not be the law. Now, I want to also ask a question as to this trust. I'm so very much interested in it. I had an opportunity of addressing a small congregation of a church congregation, some 2 weeks ago about all this. And I have this confusion as to this creation of a trust on an Igyobe, because I know that in Ogbahon and Christ Apostolic Church, I think, in Ogbahon's case, when an Igyobe was given out as gift survivors, the court stepped it down. So, if an Igyobe now is created, if a trust is now created in an Igyobe, will it stand? Can it stand? So okay. That's my take on that one. And my sister, Mrs. Aigbe, you were talking about flowing from the Ukure issue the girl child now has a problem of inheritance where they are all females, where all the, what I think, ukure or no ukure, in accordance with the law, the girl child will still inherit that house. In Benin, it will not go to the brother of the disease. If you that if what is agitating my mind, so you will explain more, please. Thank you.
Okay. What I'll do, because of time, we would like to close. I will take, before we respond, we just respond to the questions all together. I will take just 2 more questions. We're going to be around, there's a small cocktail, especially for those who are here, where we can discuss some of these issues. I'm just concerned about the time. So we'll take just 1 more question. And for us, as practitioners in trust, we'll be around to answer some questions, but we'll answer the 2 questions that my Lord rated. Can we have a further, just one further?
Thank you very much. I've listened to all the presentations. I want to look at the issue that has to do with female inheritance, female succession and trust. Where I come from, I'm from Ogoni land, Ogoni River State. There is a tradition called the Sira tradition, where the first daughter sometimes are not allowed to marry. The father will tell the first daughter to remain, and then you can make a choice. She makes her choice of any man, and the person, will begin to have children. And those children, and bears the name of the father. Bears the name of the father, not the man, that, begets them. Then the female child has a right to compete with all the male in the family in the area of property allocation. They have to allocate lands, everything, to the female, to that particular daughter. That's the Sira tradition. I want to state very clearly here in relation to what is happening in Benin culture. I have discovered very clearly that not all families are rich. That somehow maybe you'll be thinking that maybe some families have buildings, have lands and all that. There are some poor families. The bottom line here, for me, is give quality education to the female child. I have to say this because if the child is not educated, and maybe there are few properties or even no property to be shared, and the child is not educated, the female child is not educated, she's also stand at very serious disadvantage. On grounds that number 1, she's not educated. Number 2, it also affects her marriage. And all that. In a case where the female child, is competing with male who have the male children, and they have a lot of properties and all that to share. And maybe you discover very clearly there are some that are educated in the family, some are not educated. And the educated one wants to take over everything, where the non-educated ones are also struggling for it. Okay. Because another very serious problem.
Can I? Yes.
So, thank you.
That's a matter that we will address when we step down from this podium. There are 2 questions that was asked. They're legal questions, but I don't know if there's I would attempt to answer, but if there's a preference, I don't know if anyone wants to answer what my Lord had asked. He asked, first of all, whether a trust will stand in view of the fact that in Obao and Christ Apostolic Church, a gift failed. And she's also asked that the only way in which you could change is by going to courts, which with the greatest respect, disagree, and I will talk about that shortly. I don't know if anyone wants to answer.
Yes, you made a very good suggestion. I no longer work there now, I'm a retired permanent secretary, but I will call the secretary sit him down for him to appreciate your view line, which I think is very, very important, so that it can have the desired effect all through the lines. Thank you.
Okay, let me attempt. First of all, in Ogiame and Ogiame, a passing comment was made by the Supreme Court that you take assets and responsibilities. So it's the implementation of the principle that is the problem. And as Mr. Danine had said, there are no consequences when you do not do that. In real terms, when you have a gift or a property subject to condition, there's a rescission if you don't apply, if you don't comply with that condition. So you take these assets with responsibility, but there's no consequence if you don't assume the responsibility. So it's the practical implementation that is the problem. That's the first point. The second point about gift, and if I remember that case properly, the evidence that was led seems to suggest that there was a deliberate attempt to disinherit. Now, with a trust, because the principle of trust is so entrenched, even in the custom, for example, my view, the first son, if he hasn't performed the second burial, holds the property on trust. It's a principle. Now, unless you undermine the whole concept of trust, then you see that it cannot apply. Because in the famous case of Idehe, and all the host of cases, Osula and Osula, Agidbe and Agidbe, I think it's been well accepted that the first son who takes the property, the Bini man can make a will. It is the Igiogbe that is the problem, if he's not a hereditary chief. So, and the will states there that it is subject to customary law. The Wills Act, Section 3. We trust, there's no principle that says it is subject to customary law because it is not testamentary. So unless you say that the owner of his property cannot do anything with his property, then you undermine the principle of trust. And so if Ogbaho, and I come to your second question, if Ogbaho is interpreted or misinterpreted in that way, what the Law Commission does everywhere else in the world is the absence of a Law Commission that's causing this problem. Decisions will come and many will be not in accordance with what the people understand the law to be. In every part of the world, the Law Commission comes in and introduces a law to reverse that mishap that has been created by that wrong decision, even in the United Kingdom. That's why you have the Law Revision Commission, where decisions are made and it is not in accordance with the people's understanding of law. The Law Revision Commission will introduce a law and reverse it. If you wait in Nigeria, where it takes approximately 3 to 5, 7 years, even in the High Court, 3 years, and then you go to the Court of Appeal, it takes another 5, 7 years, and then in the Supreme Court, 20 years, I'll be dead by the time there's any change in the custom of Benin. And I don't want my girl daughters to suffer the same fate as many have suffered. Ladies and gentlemen, my lords, chiefs, I think this has been a very interesting discuss. It has raised many, many issues. We're very good at discussing in Nigeria. The problem is when we take it to the next level, and I will be putting my big daddy, Chief, no, sorry, not a chief, Mr. Danine, under a lot of pressure that we should form some sort of platform or gathering to make representations to the President Oba, who is dynamic and who himself is concerned about some of the issues that we're facing, especially with the girl trafficking issue. Thank you very much. I say thank you to my lords. I say thank you to the audience. And I say thank you for those who have joined us through the virtual platform. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you very much. For those of us who are here, there's a small cocktail. Thank you.
I got my tongue in So I get Thank you.